This is Eric L. Dunavant, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Redefining Success. Joining me today is Grammy-nominated, Dove Award-winning music and gospel artist, Jeff Pearls. We're going to have a great time. He and I were visiting before the show. He was already telling me things that God has been doing in his life to just kind of show him redefine success and help him kind of see some things that he wasn't seeing before. So you're going to want to stay tuned. I made him stop telling the story because I was afraid he was going to use it all up. So Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, we are honored ourselves. You said you'd listen to a couple episodes, so you know my first question. My first question is, it's Saturday afternoon. We got the barbecue going. I got burgers and hot dogs over on the grill, unless you prefer something else. But I've invited all my friends over. Would you please introduce yourself to my friends?
Well, my name is Jeff Pearls. I'm originally from a little suburb of Portland, Oregon called Dundee.
Okay.
And I grew up in a Christian home. My mother gave me a love for the Word of God, and my dad gave me a love for music. I remember as just a very small child when we go to church, in children's church, my favorite part of the service for children's church was the mission story. I don't know if they still do that or not, but I was always intrigued with that. And so it's really no surprise that I grew up becoming a minister of music and travel the world, singing about the love of God to people around the world.
But that's not what you're doing today.
Well, I'm doing a little bit of that today, still a little bit.
Okay.
Before COVID, before our world shut down, we were on the road 200 days a year.
Wow.
And then we sat home for 10 months, but during the shutdown, but we've been involved in writing gospel music and publishing Christian music, producing it, trying to help other people. Because I'm a firm believer, when God blesses you, you need to pass it on, bless others. And so that's what we've endeavored to do. We've been doing that now for about 35 years.
Wow.
So it's been great. When I was 7 years old, my first gospel quartet came to visit the little country church where we attended. And I was so intrigued with the bass singer. And I said, God, let me become a bass singer. And he did. And that's what I
could hear it.
Yeah,
I could hear it in you.
Yeah. So it's been a blessed life, and I've just enjoyed it.
So, I mean, music seems to be your passion. That seems to be your, tell us some of the ways. I mean, so you heard that gospel singer. Tell us a little bit of the story. Like, what was the journey like? Because I don't imagine that you end up touring the country that many days like that. You don't start out touring the country like that. Give us a little bit of kind of some of the ups and downs along the way.
Well, my family and I, we had a gospel group when I was a kid. And so we got to travel the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana was basically where we traveled. And my dad was also in the real estate business. And this was back in the early to mid 80s.
Okay.
Well, you know what happened. We had the Great Recession of the 80s, and interest rates went up to 18 to 20%. And we wound up, after a year and a half of renting this house, we wound up homeless because our landlord could not, let us live there anymore. But he stuck with us for a year and a half. And so we wound up living in a tent. And but it was during that time that music really kept me encouraged, kept me close to the Lord, kept me in church, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And so I have experienced firsthand the power of Christian music, and from the highs and the lows. But the day after I graduated high school, I was 17 years old when this happened. And we were homeless for about 18 months. And the day after I graduated high school, I left for Nashville, and my family followed me. So we all relocated to Nashville, and that was almost 38 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. What did you expect to find in Nashville when you left versus what did you find?
I expected that when I hit town and started distributing my demo tape, because we had cassette tapes back then, that the doors are just going to fly open for me, and people are going to say, man, where have you been? And it wasn't that way at all. As a matter of fact, I would go out every day after school. I was in college.
Yeah.
Go out every day after school, and take my demo tapes around to record companies and producers that I had read about in some of the gospel music magazines, and also artists. If I saw a tour bus sitting alongside the road, I would pull up. If it was a gospel group, I'd knock on the door. I wouldn't recommend you do that now. This was back in the 80s. But and I remember walking into one producer's office. He didn't have a secretary. Nobody was manning the door for him. He was the only one in his office at that time. And I walked in, told him what I wanted, and he said, "You have a tape?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Let me listen to it." So he listened to it, about half a song right there on the spot, put it in his cassette deck.
Yep.
Listened to about the first verse and half the chorus, and he shut the tape off and he said, "Where did you say you were from?" And I said, "Oregon." He said, "Did you move to Nashville specifically to sing gospel music and make that your career?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Pack your bags and go home. You'll never make it in this town."
Did he really?
He sure did. And I was so hurt and so angry.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was what I needed, to let me know that, you need to keep refining your skill.
Mm.
And when the door finally does open, it'll be the right time, because timing is so important, especially when you're on God's timetable, because his timetable and our timetable are never
Right.
our
Right.
calendars never seem to be synced up, but I've learned the hard way that if you do it God's way and his timing is always perfect.
So what was out of that particular experience, and maybe there have been other experiences that were kind of as you were moving into, like somebody finally was like, "Yeah, no, we want to give you a shot," and I don't know what that story looks like, but what was the greatest lesson that you were willing to refine coming out of that, I guess, door slamming or that door shutting?
That you have to believe in yourself, and if you believe you can do it, you can do it,
Okay.
regardless of what anybody tells you. Um, Ironically, the first group that I got a job with that gave me a shot was recording for this man's record label.
Was
Yeah. This was about 2 years after the fact, and, of course, I never brought it up, and he never did either. I don't even think he put 2 and 2 together, still hasn't to this day,
really? Oh, so
even though
you're
he
still with his recording group?
No,
Oh,
it's been years, but he's became a dear friend, and he's hired me to come in and sing sessions on some of his recordings. And he even called me one time years ago. He said he was working with a quartet that had a young bass singer and wanted to know if I'd coach the bass singer.
is that right? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
so,
good.
so everything comes back around.
What
So
is it? I mean, I think you're going to say your faith in God. That's going to be one thing. But what are some other highlights that got you through some of those darkest moments of like, even, I mean, knowing you have to believe in yourself, but there's a switch that has to go on to just kind of keep going when more and more people say no.
Well, you have to focus, because if you have to know what your goal is, and you have to focus
Mm,
on that thing. So many people, they want to do all this stuff here, but you've got to focus, and you've got to be laser focused on what it is that you want. And then you have to create a network of people that can help you get there. And
mm,
so every gospel music event in Nashville, I was there handing out tapes and making
okay.
connections and that kind of thing. And the group that gave me my first professional group that I was with, that gave me an opportunity, I had given them one of my demo tapes. And
Mm,
God will place people in your life. There was a gentleman at this particular convention that I had attended, never met him before, and we just got to talking backstage. I had no business being backstage, but somehow I talked my way back there because I
right.
was on the program that night. Got to talking to him. And before the night was over, this is how God works. He was introducing me. He was with a group that was performing. He was introducing me to all of his friends in the other groups, saying, "This is the greatest bass singer I've ever met in my life." And he'd never heard me sing a note.
Is
And
that right?
I asked him, I said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "You don't know if I can sing or not." He said, "I can tell by the way you talk you can sing." He said so. And from his introduction, I got my first professional job. And that's back in 1987.
Wow. So
Yeah.
did your family, I mean, so you're kind of, I imagine you're struggling during these years. What's your family doing? I mean, are they trying to break into the gospel music scene too?
No, my dad was working for a Bible company, and
Okay.
mom at that time was a homemaker.
Yep.
My sister she's 10 years younger than me, so she was still living at home, and I was out on the road riding a tour bus, and making $150 a week and having to pay my own expenses out of that,
Oh man.
So, but that was back when you could eat on the road for about $30 a week. You can't even do that in one meal now,
Right.
but I was able to put $90 a week in my savings account. And I mean, I was living the dream. I thought, man, I had arrived, and it was, so if you believe in what you're doing, it's not all about the money.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's definitely true. Um, I've asked several musicians. This is always my fascinating question. I'm always curious what your answer is going to be. Is when did you know it was going to work? Like what would? And I'm not talking about the dream part of it. I'm talking about like the reality part. Like this is. I've been dreaming this, and I've keep pushing. But there, you cross the line where you go, no. I really am going to be able to do this. I'm seeing the money come in, or I'm seeing the things happen that are going to actually. This is the life I've wanted, but I've actually created it. Or God's opened the door. I'm not trying to take that out of it, but you get what I'm saying.
It. I know. That happened for me probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
I've been here 35 years, so I knocked around town for 20 years, working, for $150 a week.
Yeah.
Doing what I had to do to make ends meet, but probably about 15 years ago. But what happened for me was everything that I set out to do intentionally really never worked out the way I thought it would. And the things that seemed like accidents at the time or coincidence are the things that kind of worked. And so one of the things that seemed like an accident at the time was that people started calling me to sing on sessions in the studio. So I started singing on other people's records. And so when I was home now, I have two streams of income, and so you meet the studio world in Nashville is a whole nother thing, because a lot of times the singers and the musicians that play on the road don't necessarily play well or sing well in the studio.
Oh yeah. Right.
It's, two different mindsets. And so I began to get asked to sing on other people's records, which was a blessing. And that's how I eventually, through the contacts that I made there, was able to, work out on the Grand Ole Opry, make some connections out there, and wound up, singing on a couple of Dolly Parton's records. And Daly and Vincent had a tribute to the Statler Brothers recording that they put out there that was in all the Cracker Barrel stores across the country, got nominated for a Grammy Award,
Yeah.
So, a lot of that stuff just kind of happened by accident, or so I thought. But you know what? God has a plan. There's no accidents with God. And so I tell people, I said, I wasn't born to be a Grammy nominee or Dove Award winner. I wasn't born to sing on the Grand Ole Opry or to travel the world. God allowed these things to happen to give me a platform so I can talk about Him, what He has done through me, and how it's impacted other people. And so that's the purpose right there.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and imagine you have children. Do you have children?
One son.
Who's how old?
40.
Okay. So 15 years ago, he was about out of the house. This is the point that you realize. So he was raised in a home of like, we're just kind of stringing this together, but because you said it was 15 years ago that you were like, yeah.
Well, I married his mother 14 years ago. So
okay.
He was already kind of out of the house by the time he and she and I got together,
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand. Yeah. I just didn't know
if
there were any stories of what it's like to kind of manage a house. It's like, hey, are you sure this is what you ought to keep doing? Where you've got to just kind of keep pursuing the vision that God's given you.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that through traveling with other people I've seen people go through that. You have to have a woman that is just as called to this as you are, because when you're on the road a couple of 100 days a year and the washing machine tears up and the kids are remodeling the house and she's having a bad day, she has to know that, hey, this is what I'm called to as well, to support him, be a helpmate to him,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What was two different sides of the same coin?
Mm-hmm.
What were your favorite parts of being out on the road? Favorite kind of, and not necessarily like the moment, but kind of the overall experience. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of that, what was the hardest part about being out on the road?
Well, as I have gotten older, the hardest part is just being gone for, days at a time. One of my favorite things to do was to travel overseas, because the audiences overseas especially in certain parts of the world, certain parts of Africa and the
Mm,
Philippines and certain parts, they don't have anything but Jesus.
right.
And so, when you go over there and sing gospel music, when we went to the Philippines a few years ago, we had 10,000 people showed up in an outdoor venue for sound check, and there was 30,000 for the concert. And then 5,000 of them wanted to do a meet and greet afterwards. So in Korea, it was the same thing. We were there and sang at a university, and it was I think $40 American per seat, and the place was a 4,000 seat venue. We turned 1,000 away the first night, 800 away the second night, and the people wanted to do a meet and greet. It was 2.5 hours, and so in America, we are so blessed,
Yeah.
but our blessings have become our curse. And as the Bible said, we kind of sit back as Americans. A lot of times we don't even realize we're doing it. Say, you know what, we're fat, we're rich, we're in need of nothing because God blessed us. But our blessings have become our curse in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I like to say, I mean, it's the comfort is our struggle, right?
Absolutely.
But when we're so comfortable, we look for problems,
That's right. Yep.
but you're
Yep.
right. I mean, the rest of the world, people who are dealing with poverty and all they've got is Jesus. It makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
It makes a big difference. I mean, there's some other stories you may want to tell, but I thought it was interesting when before we started the show, kind of like what God started doing over the last few years, especially your COVID experience and things like that. I'd love for you to kind of tell my audience about that, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, be glad to. About 15 months ago, I was diagnosed with double COVID pneumonia and acute respiratory failure. And so I drove myself to the ER because my wife, she wasn't feeling good. I didn't want to call an ambulance and have, all the nosy neighbors, looking out the window, what's going on over there,
Right.
So I just drove myself and walked in the ER, collapsed in their chair, and they said, Mr. Pearls, are you aware that your heart rate's 247 beats a minute and your oxygen level is 67% and falling? And the next thing I knew, I was taking a very quick ride to the ER and put on a gurney, and I had about 4 technicians begin to work on me. They put me on 55 liters of oxygen. The third night in the hospital, I found out that the pastor that we had just ministered at their church 10 days prior had passed away from COVID, and 6 people in that congregation wound up on ventilators. And it was a very small church of 125 people. And so that was a very dark night for me, but I watched the sun come up the next morning. And I told the Lord, my oxygen level wasn't up at the mid 70s. I tried to sit up in the bed and the alarms would go off and the nurses would come, I'd cough, and it was horrible. But I watched the sun come up the next morning. I told the Lord, I said, thank you for allowing me to see another sunrise. And I want you to heal me, Lord, but if you see fit for this to be as good as it's going to get for me, then I'll figure out a way to serve you in this condition. And then I said, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I said, would you send somebody by my room today to tell me I'm going to be okay? 3 hours later, this nurse appears in my doorway. He looks at my chart. He looks at me in the bed. He comes over. He said, are you the same Jeff Pearls I know? I said, I don't know. Who are you? He had a shield and 2 or 3 masks, Come to find out, now we're in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay.
Yeah.
And come to find out, it was a kid that I had ridden the school bus with in Oregon in grade school.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. And he comes in and he said, I'm going to go talk to your doctor about a couple of things. But before he left, he said, I just want you to know that my wife and I are going to be praying for you and you're going to be okay. Man, I just broke because I saw God's hand at work, even in the midst of all of this, So long story short, 9 days later, I came home. My doctor told me, he said, you'll probably never sing again. He said, your lungs are so scarred. He said, your road to recovery is going to be extremely long. You're going to be on oxygen indefinitely, maybe the rest of your life. We don't know. Got home, was on oxygen at home. And I just felt like the Holy Spirit told me, said, you need to get to the beach to where you'll be able to sit by the beach. That salt air, can heal your lungs. So my wife started trying to find a room down there at the beach in Florida somewhere. And this is in June. Everybody's on vacation. We can't find anything.
Right.
But she just kept on very diligently. And she said, I finally found one. Well, it was down in South Florida. So we drove down there. Eric, when I got there, I couldn't even walk from the parking garage to the room without having to sit down and just, yeah. So she would sit up in the room and she would work until about 3 o'clock every afternoon. I'd go down and sit by the beach and try to walk. Can I tell you that by the end of day 4, I was walking 4 miles on the beach?
No, you weren't.
I was.
Wow.
God is my witness. So we got home, and my wife and I, we had been investing in real estate. That's a whole nother story about how that kind of happened. It came from being homeless that I talked about earlier. But anyway, I told her, I said, we need to buy us a condo, and so we can have a place to go, but also that we can open it up to other people to find healing just like we did. And so I called a friend of mine that I knew had some condos in Panama City Beach. And I said, hey, my wife and I are thinking about maybe looking into buying one. And they said, well, come on down. We're going to be down there. So we came down, kind of told them what we were wanting to do. And they said, meet us for dinner. So we met at a little restaurant there in Panama City. And they said, we've been talking about it, and we have a unit that we'd like to sell you if you're interested. So we went over and looked at it and prayed about it. And the place has been anointed, prayed over.
Yeah.
So we just have asked the Lord to send people there that, want to create memories for their family, but also need to be healed in some way. That's really a tool that God's allowed us to have in our hands that we can use to bless other people.
So I'm going to ask you a question you may not be able to answer, but as you keep talking about this, I want to know so one of my experiences a lot of times, some people you're talking about, I kind of felt God tell me this and I felt God say this. And one of the greatest experiences I've had from people who are like, how do you hear from God?
Right.
How does that happen? And so I'd love to just kind of hear from you, your overall experience, especially for people who maybe struggle with that. Do you have any advice for people kind of in that place of what's the best way to put yourself in a position to really know the voice of the Lord?
Yeah, that's a great question, because so many times we get the voices in our head confused with God's voice. But
that's good.
I have never heard the audible voice of God. Okay, I'll just say that. But sometimes God communicates to us, me, with thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll have a crazy thought and I'll think, okay, surely that can't be the Lord. But then my wife will confirm it, or somebody else at church will confirm it.
Yeah.
And so that's one way that God uses to communicate and to make himself known, is using other people to confirm what you think is a crazy thought. Right. And I'll just tell you a quick story. When I got home from the hospital, I got home on a Sunday night. And on Tuesday night, I'm laying in my bed. And I wake up at 3:30 in the morning. It's pitch dark in my room, but I felt God's presence in my room. And I just heard him say to me, I'm going to raise you back up. I'm going to give you your voice back, but you need to start singing now. Well, you had to understand that up until this point, I had no voice. I couldn't even breathe hardly, but I began to sing. And my voice was just as clear as it ever was.
What?
Yeah, and I sang until 6 o'clock that morning. I drifted back off to sleep. Well, I got up the next morning, I had my oxygen on, and came and spoke to my wife, and she said, your voice is back. I said, yeah, God healed it last night. And 45 days after that, we called the oxygen company, said, we don't need your oxygen anymore. And I was singing at a camp meeting in Ohio. I mean, it was a little bit difficult, but I wept the whole the whole way through that, because that was God's fulfillment of his promise to me, that what he said was going to happen, and it happened. So I think that God uses other people to confirm things. And a lot of times when you're talking about hearing God's voice, if whatever God's telling you to do seems utterly ridiculous or so far beyond your ability, then it's probably God. But he'll use other people to confirm it.
That's right. That's right. I think
that's the spirit. So we need.
I'm going to ask you to probably confirm this. I bet that this is true, but my experience is, the more you walk into, well, I wonder if that was God, and then ask for confirmation and look for people. But the more, like you said, sometimes it's the crazy stuff, and it's the obedience and the crazy stuff that teaches you how to hear him better.
That's right. Absolutely. And we met at a conference we were both speaking at, and
Yeah.
one of the things that that I brought out in my presentation was that whenever you feel like God's given you an idea, one of the things that you can test it by is, does it include God's people?
Mm.
God's not going to give you an idea that won't bless his people. And
Yeah.
so, if it's just something that you're wanting to do just because you want to do it, that may just be you or bad
Right.
pizza, whatever, but yeah,
Well, I'm going to add on to that, and it will glorify him, not you.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's right.
If you're looking for fame and fortune out of the word, it's probably you and not him.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Jeff, is there anything that we didn't get into that you wanted to share or you feel called to share while we're visiting here?
I just want to say this, that your talk that you gave out in Nebraska when we were both out there really got me to thinking. And at this stage of the game, your whole, I would just recommend anybody, if they've not heard your talk on ROI and your book. I've read your book, What If We're Doing It All Wrong? Get the book and read it. But ROI, one of the ROIs was return on impact. And that's really kind of where I'm at right now. I want everything that I do to have the maximum impact on the maximum number of people for the kingdom.
Amen. Amen. Well, this is coming. You said you listened to some episodes. My last question is always going to be the same. In 3 generations, what do you hope your great grandchildren remember about you?
I wrote a song several years ago that I think sums it up. And it says, one day all they'll have is a faded photograph. Remind them of the man I used to be. There'll be things that they recall, but I pray above it all, the love of Jesus is what remains of me.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Just let God use you, let him lead you. It's not a sin to accumulate things, but make sure you're blessing God's people.
Yeah.
While you're doing it, because he's not allowing you to accumulate all of this for your own kingdom. It's for you to pass it on, be a reservoir.
Oh, I love that. I love that. We like to say, be a pipe, not a bucket.
That's right. Absolutely. That's right.
Hey, Jeff, if people want to follow you, you're still doing music. You've got music you've done in the past. People want to kind of track down things that you've done or stay in touch with you, or kind of where you've been and what you're doing. What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, for the music stuff, you can go to khofficial.org. The name of the group's the King's Heralds. It's a group I sing with at this point. And you can reach out to me on Facebook, on Messenger, if you want to get in touch with me there, or the real estate stuff. Jeff Pearls at Exit Real Estate Solutions, my Facebook page there. So
okay,
I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Hey, next time you come to Nashville, holler at me. I'd love to take you out.
I would love that. I was in Nashville briefly about a month ago, but it wasn't long enough.
So, okay. Well, hey, next time come long enough for my wife and I would love to treat you to a good meal.
Oh, I appreciate that. That. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone will be with you again on the next show. Thank you so much for being with us today. God bless you. Have a fantastic day.